Hey guys, today is the field test for my Sharpie brush tip markers. Let me see if I can find, not in this book. Recently, I did a swatch test. There we go. To test to see how well they blend and they react to like alcohol-based blender or even rubbing alcohol. And there is some reaction to it. So I thought I would go ahead and do a field test with them. And if you're interested in unconventional alcohol markers or using your permanent markers as alcohol-based markers, I highly recommend you check out my post at natasoup.blogspot.com when I review Bic Markets as part of my affordable art supply series. If you just search Bic Markets in the search bar, they should come right up for you. So today I am going to first of all, I don't have any usable skin tones really in the Sharpies. So I will be augmenting just the skin with Copics, and I'm also going to be blending with an colorless blender, a Copic colorless blender, as well as some alcohol goodness, I can't talk today. Some alcohol-based, I will also be blending with rubbing alcohol and a Fantastics. And these are made by Sukiniko, and I have other videos demonstrating these. Okay, so we're ready to get started with the actual field test portion of this review. And I'm going to go ahead and parcel out a little bit of rubbing alcohol. I ordered my Sharpie brush markers off of Amazon, but you may find them in stores. I just don't leave the house. So, you know. And there are probably a couple of ways you can render with these. You can probably apply them to a clear piece of scrap plastic, like I'm going to do for the first layer of Kara's head. And I mean, this is like literally trash plastic, right? You're not spending any money on this. You could get this from anywhere. And I'm going to soak my Fantastics, which you can find either on Amazon or at Joann's, and start applying it like this. Because if I can build up some color, I would like to do that. And this is similar to the alcohol palette tutorial I shared with you guys earlier. And you might be able to do this with a Q-tip. I do need to experiment with a Q-tip and see if this will work with one. Because I know not everyone has a Joann's in their area. And when I do these sort of reviews, I want it to be as accessible as possible. I mean, the rubbing alcohol, that's very accessible. You can get that at any Walmart, any drugstore, any grocery store, even some gas stations. Like, rubbing alcohol should not be hard for you to find. Scrap plastic isn't going to be hard to find. Now, I did ink this with a Sailor Mitsuo Aida, which you can only get online. But other markers that are alcohol marker proof are Sakura microns and pigment markers, which are available at, again, Joann's, Michael's, where else? I've seen them at Office Depot. I haven't seen them at Target, but Target does carry the EK tools. The EK tool pins, which I reviewed on the blog previously. So I'm just cleaning out my Fantastics with some rubbing alcohol, and I'm going to press it like that to squeeze out as much of the brown as I can. Going to go ahead and directly color her mouth with the red, and there is some flexibility to these brush nibs. They are compressed fiber rather than foam. I know this nib looks gross. It's a it's a demonstrator nib from my Spectrum Noir markers. And it's a soft, like, rubber foam that is very flexible, although it's a little bit grippy. These compressed fiber nibs are not grippy at all, but they are prone to becoming mushy, so you do want to have kind of a light hand. Go ahead. Now see, the next layer, that's like a super dark brown compared to what I just put down. So I'm going to use my Copic and try to lighten that up a bit and blend it out, and we'll see how that works. Okay, it looks like there was like an immediate response, which is good. But I do think I'm going to do another layer of the alcohol marker on plastic picked up with a brush. Just because that dark brown is almost black. And the rubbing alcohol reactivates the permanent marker. So even if your permanent marker dries on your plastic palette, that's not a big deal because the alcohol is going to reactivate this. I am even reapplying some of her freckles with that dark brown. I did do the original layer in Copic, just because I didn't have any skin tones, and the Sharpie brush range is sort of limited in terms of colors. What you see out right here is pretty much what they have. If you wanted to use this set as like your primary marker set, or you're just learning alcohol markers and you manage to convince your parents to give you like the 10 to 14 bucks it would cost to buy this set, you are going to need some other colors. You can use like Crayola super tips. And I have a tutorial kind of review thing on my blog as part of the Walmart Art Supply review series, where I show you how to use them as a watercolor marker. So you could do a mixed medium like that for the skin, and then use these or Bic markets as your marker medium, and they'll work together because the alcohol is not going to activate the water. So now we have her dress, and I was thinking this really nice bright blue. And to be fair, I'm probably not going to get to all of the colors unless I do something in the background, and I might. So I'm going to go back to the on the palette technique. And I cleaned out my rubbing alcohol and I cleaned out my Fantastic. And the Fantastic is a good way to apply a lot of alcohol ink to an area without with like controllable streaking, because it's a little bit wetter than a alcohol marker would normally be. So you can basically paint it on. And this method works great if you're using cheaper alcohol markers like these brush markers, or if the Bic markets, or I don't know, just any brand that only has a bullet tip instead of a brush nib and has kind of a gross chisel nib, not like a well-made chisel nib. This method is a good way to quickly cover areas. So it might well be worth convincing your mom or your dad or an aunt or an uncle or a friend to take you down to Joann's or any store in your area that carries Fantastics, because it would end up adding a whole lot of usability. And you get like 10 in a pack, and they're pretty cheap. They're like $5, but I've been using the same one for like 3 videos now, and as long as you clean it out with lots of rubbing alcohol, and rubbing alcohol is super cheap, but as long as you clean it out with lots of rubbing alcohol, you should get lots of uses out of it. So it will really last you a while. Now we're already having a problem with and this is probably my fault, oversaturation of the alcohol in my attempts to like blend the marker out cleanly. It's bled through the paper and it's bleeding into the buttons. So I need to be careful in areas that are adjacent to her skin. And I will be doing a direct application with this blue at some point. It's a very intense blue, and I wanted to build up to the color. And I first learned about a variation of this technique by watching a Tim Holtz video where he's pushing his alcohol ink palette. But I then applied a popular crafter technique where you apply your like your distress markers or your other water-based markers to a piece of scrap plastic. And I figured, well, if the alcohol palette trick works and the scrap plastic trick works, then they probably work together. And lo and behold, they do. So you don't actually need to buy a Tim Holtz palette. And if you have a limited collection of markers, this should work well to like stretch your tones out. And I'm just using a watercolor, like a full watercolor pan to hold my rubbing alcohol. You could use a bottle cap, like a plastic bottle cap should work just fine, or even maybe like a metal bottle cap, or just any tiny cup or container, because you really don't need to hold a lot, because as you're dipping your Fantastics back into the alcohol, it is going to contaminate it with color. And I showed in another video how you can utilize the resulting color to create a kind of a fake watercolor inspired impressionist background. So it doesn't have to go entirely to waste. It really depends on like how thrifty you're trying to be. I mean, you can be real thrifty and make things work triple duty, or you can just decide that you don't really need that batch of ink, that 10 cents worth of rubbing alcohol or a penny worth of rubbing alcohol isn't really worth it because the color isn't working for you anyway. I'm going to use the rubbing alcohol to sort of smooth out some of these areas since they are getting kind of patchy. And something that I realized this year is that if you're trying to save money, what you're going to end up spending is time. And if it's something you enjoy, if it's something that you enjoy the fact that it takes a long time to do it, then there's no reason to invest a lot of money. You're going to be investing a lot of time in figuring out how to make it work, and that's fine because you enjoy it. Or if you just don't have the money and you wouldn't have access to it in any other way, then, you know, spending the time, that's perfectly fine. But if you are doing it professionally, and I wouldn't recommend this method for art you're going to sell, because Sharpies are not archival and rubbing alcohol is not archival. So this will probably disintegrate. But alcohol markers aren't necessarily archival either, because the inks they use are, the dyes they use rather, are color fugitive. That's how you get those brilliant colors. Trying to be careful. I always end up making a huge mess with the rubbing alcohol, no matter how careful I try to be. Okay, let's go back in with the brown while we let this kind of dry out. Nice thing about the brush is you can definitely get those hair highlights by utilizing like a flicking motion. So one of the downsides of using rubbing alcohol, or really any alcohol-based marker or solvent, is you need to work in a well-ventilated area because you can start getting lightheaded. And my studio is fairly well ventilated. I'm still getting kind of woozy. So you may even need to step away from the project and give yourself some fresh air. Please don't make yourself sick making art. I know there are artists who have sort of glorified the whole you are so passionate about it that it's going to kill you. Osamu Tezuka died in his 50s because he basically burnt his candle at both ends. Van Gogh, you know, probably had probably needed some help, but the lengths he would push himself for his art weren't necessarily great either. Toulouse-Lautrec, like, we have so many examples of artists who die early or kill themselves because they push themselves too hard. Please don't become one of those artists. When I was in undergrad at UNO in the printmaking classes, my favorite teacher, Cheryl Hayes, she basically showed me on her, like by bending her fingernails like they were made of plastic, she showed me what working with those sort of toxic caustic chemicals can do to your body. And I had a chemistry teacher who, before she became a chemistry teacher, worked for Shell, who basically had heavy metal poisoning. Making yourself sick, becoming sick for your work, that's not a glamorous thing. It basically not only shortens your lifespan, but it shortens how long you can make things. So, you know, please get proper sleep. Please eat regular meals. Please take care of yourself. Suffering for your art. I know people who don't know better, or people who've only done it for a short time and then their careers kind of took off. They glamorize that sort of starving artist lifestyle, but it's a terrible lifestyle and it is not mandatory. So please take care of yourselves, guys. And please don't perpetuate the myth of the starving artist. We would all like to make a living wage. And yes, I love doing this, but, you know, I wouldn't be able to afford to do this without the generous contributions of my fantastic Patreon backers, without YouTube ads. And I do take on freelance work. So, like, even though I love art education, I love showing you guys this stuff and doing reviews for you, it doesn't pay my bills. I don't get things sent to me from companies. This is not cheap. So, you know, it's not like I'm like sitting on some hidden stockpile. I think we have hit the point where I've gotten as much saturation out of applying the blue as I'm going to get with this method of application. So I'm going to need to switch over and start using the marker on the paper directly and blending it out using the Copic colorless blender. And you don't have to use Copic brand. You can use Prismacolor, you can use Spectrum Noir, you can use any brand of colorless blender that you already have access to. Let's flip it over and check out the damage. All right. So from this point, I'm going to directly apply this turquoise blue to the dress, and I'm going to try to blend it out where possible and necessary with a Copic. And I want to use a light hand because I don't want to push the other color that I've already laid down too far back. I just want to create kind of an even transition. And I can even go back and forth with, yeah, that'll work. The rubbing alcohol and the blue to sort of blend it out. Now, I wasn't really going with a specific color for this dress other than I wanted to use the turquoise Sharpie. If you're going for a specific color, you will probably have a difficult time because this is kind of an imprecise method. So if you're going to use Sharpies or Bic markers to do alcohol marker rendering, and I mean, they're fine, they're accessible. I'm clearly making it work to an extent over here. You will probably have some difficulty attaining a sort of delicate look. If that's what you're going for, it may just be time to upgrade to alcohol markers like Copics or Prismacolors or shoot, even the AliExpress markers. You can kind of have an easier time attaining delicate colors. And I do review AliExpress markers both on here and on my blog, which I mentioned earlier, but in case you weren't paying attention, it's natosoup.blogspot.com, and there should be a card for that at some point in this video. And really, finding out about Fantastics and using them and using the plastic palette, it definitely has made a difference in my opinion of these less expensive markers, because there are certain tricks I can do that will extend the use of colors that I didn't know about like a year ago. And part of the problem with that is there seems to be a disparity between people who consider themselves illustrators, artists, comic artists, what have you, and people who consider themselves crafters. And companies that make art supplies or craft supplies have really been targeting crafters right now. And I think that's great. But there's something I think merging the two communities would be great for everyone. It would give crafters access to reviews from people who have a different education, a more formal education, so they would have better access to what things should cost as opposed to like what you're being charged as a crafter. Because crafter supplies, because it's like the popular thing right now, it's basically like marketing anything wedding, right? Like you're going to be paying twice as much for anything that has wedding on it. But if they just turn their attention to an art supply store and went armed with knowledge of what they're looking for, they could get a better quality product for less money, or a more flexible product for the same amount of money that they're paying. I mean, you guys need to trust in your own intelligence. You're smarter than you think. And then for artists, I really think they need to watch crafters videos, because there's all sorts of techniques that we wouldn't think of, or products that we wouldn't necessarily try to utilize, just because we don't know they exist. Like distress alcohol inks, for example, those are alcohol inks. You would think anybody who likes using alcohol inks, all those people with like a manga sort of illustration style, would be interested in those because they're less expensive than Copic, and they can be utilized. But I don't know too many artists who know about them because it's not being marketed at them. It doesn't hit their radar. So I'm trying to bridge that gap. And I think there are other artists / crafters, creators like Lindsay, the Frugal Crafter, for example, who are trying to bridge that gap and introduce a wider audience to both sides of the spectrum. And I know with some artist blogs, the reason they're writing a blog at all is to push the stuff they make. And hey, I'm an artist too. It would be phenomenal if I could see better sales. I'd really love that. Comics are my passion, so that's what I would like to be making some money from. But I also understand that, you're going to get readers who are just not really looking for that. And they're not really looking to be sold to immediately, like as soon as they get on the page. So I try to keep that level of shill out of my blog. I mean, I do mention the Patreon, and I do mention ways you can support me in the first paragraph. And I do use my own art, but my intention is to teach you guys something new or to help you guys out. So I'm going to use this light blue ink. I'm even going to pick up some more of this. This light blue ink I basically made to sort of sketch in, I guess, clouds. That's where I'm going. I don't know. I went without a game plan, which is not not good news. Like, don't necessarily just do without a game plan. I mean, unless you want to, unless you enjoy just doodling, which is, that's cool too. But I'm saying, if you want a specific look, you need to go in with a game plan. I'm sort of running out of that bespoke ink. I'm sure I could do better looking clouds than this. Maybe not. I'm not super great at drawing clouds. And these Fantastics, they end up holding a lot of alcohol in their bodies. So I need to clean out this nib. And another thing, when you're working with alcohol inks or solvents that have an alcohol base, you can only use alcohol to clean it. Water is not going to budge any of the blue that's inside, that dried inside of there. And it's not going to budge any of the blue that's inside of this. But rubbing alcohol will. And you can just basically dab it out with a paper towel until it comes out clear. And you might get some staining. My Fantastic is probably stained all the way through now. And that's okay. Let's see what comes out of this end, actually. I like skin tone. But as long as you get the majority out from the top, it's not going to affect your color. I mean, if you want to, you could even designate them by color family. So you have your yellow, orange, Fantastic, your blue, green, your red and violet, right? You could even do that, but I'm cheap. And I think a lot of you guys are on a budget. So we're not going to do that. And the brush on these has been working out pretty good. I'd really like to see them introduce some more colors to the line. Sharpie, if you're watching this, I would love to take a look at those if you're ever thinking about it. And blend it out a little bit with my Copic colorless blender. And if you're feeling fancy and you have access to it, let's see if I've got one. Where is my white signal blender? Where could you be? Let me go find that. Okay, so you can use, and I will in a minute, you can use a white gel pen to add highlights to your piece. I actually think I wanted to add a design to her dress. And that way we'll also see how well the colors sort of layer on top of each other. So I'm going for this sort of magenta color. I guess it's, no, that's the hot pink. So it must be this one right here. And I'm using the brush tip to do tiny little flowers. And now we're going to use, actually I want to use light green. It might not show up, but I want to see if it will. Brush tips are actually really good for this, so good job, Sharpie. I'm not super sure who the target market for this is, but they perform well so far. I would be really curious, in fact, if I have any Sharpie reps in my audience or anyone who might know who these markers are for. I would love to see, I'd love to hear who your target demographic is. They come in colors that seem like they'd be appealing for a graffiti artist. If you guys just added a couple of skin tones, I could see a lot of other artists being interested in these as well. Because they're kind of a very affordable option to alcohol-based markers. And I mean, you know, not having access to skin tones, I can't tell you how workable they would really be. But it's something to consider. And I would love to test them out for you guys and let you know. I can do that privately too, if you'd prefer. Or I can do it publicly and spread the word, tell my audience about it. Because I think these are pretty cool. And I have a lot of experience reviewing alcohol markers specifically, and a lot of experience using them. And I can be very harsh, but when you don't promise a whole lot and your marker exceeds what you promised, I'm impressed. Like, so that's all you really need to do is, if you're going to promise the world, you need to be good. I would even love to see these available as like, okay, so let's call these the brights. For the most part, these are brights. I would also like to see a pastels, which is just like a two tint lighter variation of all of these markers. And then the darks. So maybe the black would be in the dark and the purple would be in the dark. And you'd have like a brighter purple than this, like something really punchy in your brights. But I think if you expanded the line a little bit, it would be even cooler. These are already super accessible. I did have to bring in some tricks to really make them work for me. But I think if you added maybe even like a pen just filled with like Sharpie solvent, you know, a blender pen, that would also add a lot of usability for people. Okay, so finishing touches, I'm pulling out the old Signo, and these are pretty ubiquitous. I think Most office supply stores carry Signo. I think Walmart carries Signo. If you can't find Signo, any white gel pen will probably work. Okay, so who should buy Sharpie brush markers? Well, if you're a young artist or someone who's interested in alcohol markers, but you don't want to sink a lot of money into finding out if they're for you, the brush markers are a good way to get an introduction to that. All you really need is some rubbing alcohol to blend, a small container to hold said rubbing alcohol, and some sort of a brush. And I'm going to be trying cheap makeup sponges at some point to see how well those work as an alternative to this. These are great, though. The only caveat I have is that they're not necessarily sold everywhere. But if you have access to just a few additional materials and maybe one or two Prismacolor or Copic skin tones, you can really make these markers work for you. Something I would like to see is an expansion of the line. I would love to see Sharpie offer more colors with the brush tip. I think the brush tip is great. As an artist, I like the brush tip better than the bullet tip on Bic markets. And Bic markets are in a wider range of colors. So I would love to see Sharpie expand on this. If you're an artist who uses Sharpie brush markers and you would like me to signal boost your work to my audience, just leave a comment and I would be happy to do so. I'm always excited to make new friends and to promote other artists. If you're an art supply company or a craft company or even a stationery company and you're interested in having your products reviewed by an artist and maybe give a demonstration of alternate ways to use them, let me know that as well. I would love to work with you. If you're just a fan who enjoys watching these sort of videos or you've learned a lot and you'd like to help support and help me make more videos, then please consider checking out my Patreon. That's natosoup.com. Sorry, wrong one. Patreon.com/natosoup. Your financial support helps me purchase more supplies and helps me edit the videos, make time for these, because I am giving up freelance time to make videos that are intended to help everyone. And if you'd like more content like this, please consider subscribing to my channel. I post new stuff at least once a week, often twice, sometimes way too often. And check out my blog, natosoup.blogspot.com, because I have 7 years worth of reviews, tutorials, demonstrations, process posts for you to enjoy. I'm Becca Hilburn. I hope you guys had a great day. This was my field test of the Sharpie brush marker. Bye!